Big round of applause for Aditi.
Hey, so my topic for today is building enterprise products that sell. It's something I've come to realize doesn't actually get talked about a lot in product meetups, and I thought it could be interesting for you to get a perspective from the other side. But before I talk about that, a little bit about why I'm talking about this today and how I got here. So I also had a fairly technical start to my career. I started as a data scientist about a decade ago. And even back then, I sort of felt a strong need to actually work closely with business. And I found myself moving closer to business teams. And so I moved to Amazon, worked across product and marketing, both in India as well as in the UK. And then most recently, over the last few years, I've been driving a go-to-market strategy for Adobe and our experience, our enterprise products. And so it's really gotten me to a point where I actually believe that getting product distribution right is probably more important than building products well enough. I know some of you may disagree, we can talk about that, but I've really come to believe that this is just as important, if not more so. And it's coming from a place where, because how many times have we worked with these average enterprise products that just continue to enjoy the customer's favor and keep growing year on year, Workday, you know what I'm talking about. And don't get me started on Teams, because I don't know how many of you struggle with it as much as I do. But clearly for everything and all of their flaws, they're getting something right? And despite being a later entrant to the market, they've clearly outdone Slack by a mile and beyond. And I can think of a few reasons why that might have happened. And that's all I'll say about it. So with that in mind, with knowing that this is sort of the existing conundrum with B2B, the go-to-market execution strategy becomes really difficult but important to solve. And I want to talk about one of the most important challenges that I see in this area. And I call it the pre to post sale chasm. And let me explain what that means. So from a PM standpoint, a simplified explanation of what you might expect would be, you do your research, you create all of the material, you plan your release, and then you're going to enable sales, and off they go and they close those big deals. But the reality actually is really different. I've worked a lot with marketing and sales teams, and I cannot tell you how much is going on behind the scenes to close those deals. And they're almost always behind all of the enablements that you guys are pushing at them. They don't really care about it, and they just want to land those deals. And so they get left behind. They don't really always understand what's going on with the product. They sell a story to the customers that doesn't really exist. And the reality is, after sale, what ends up happening is your product adoption really gets hit. And according to this Pendo report, I don't know if you see it, but for software companies across the world, even the best-in-class products really only have a feature adoption rate of about 15%, which is, if you think about it, like, what are you building for if people are not adopting it? And so this is what I call the pre-post sale chasm, and it's a really important problem because it has implications downstream, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So I want to give you 4 tips that might help you solve this problem. And the first one actually is to really understand your stakeholders' incentives. There is a massive sales engine and ecosystem that's trying to close these deals. And, salespeople always just get such a bad reputation. And we always think of them as short-termists, and they don't really know what they're doing. But they're really smart people. They know what they're doing. And I think it's up to PMs to understand where they're coming from, what their compensation structure is. And if you think about the product value chain beyond sales, you have to appreciate that 40-50% of their salary comes from closing deals and from commissions. And so for obvious reasons, they're going to try and close those deals, and we have to respect that. But there are ways to work with them, and that's what I want to talk about. So I think it's actually useful to create some dependencies with your sales teams so that you create a structure for two-way conversations to hear what they're talking about the product in those customer meetings. And crucially, these are fantastic opportunities for you to get direct customer feedback. and they're not used enough by PMs, unfortunately. So I've offered a few feedback opportunities that I really think are fundamentally useful to PMs to understand how product is talking about, how sales is talking about product. The second one is about messaging. I'm going to quote Tony Fadell, who's the co-creator of the iPhone, and in his book, which I absolutely love, famously said, your messaging is your product, right? And I think when you think about the B2B customer journey, it is so complex. It has users, buyers, influencers, but really up until that buying decision is made, it's the buyer that dominates the conversation. And you need to understand what their priorities are. So surfacing or creating a messaging framework alongside that product roadmap that elevates business value upfront and consistently through the journey in the right context and the right touch point is really important. So it's not an afterthought, it's really important because it's this messaging that really crafts their understanding of your product. And they take this understanding after the sale, and this is what they expect of you, and then you don't deliver, and then your adoption gets hit. So I think this is an under talked about problem, but it's really crucial to get this right. The third one is then about adoption. Now that you've sold the product, what do product outcomes look like? And I'm definitely not the expert to talk about product outcomes in general, but I do think product adoption is actually a big one. And in my opinion, it's actually a leading indicator of revenue and upselling as well. And so if you think about the sort of sales cycle as I've represented here, it's actually in that post-sale journey after the deal has closed that you truly have an opportunity to create a groundswell of support with a broader base of users that can come to fall in love with your product. And so it's not just, it's of course a little bit about having in-product features that can drive adoption, creating in-app guides and so on, but really driving enablement for the usage of these features with your sales teams. And so in doing so, you do want to try and create a lot of curiosity and really seed those product champions that can eventually continue that conversation of driving adoption with your end customers. And then the fourth one I'll talk about is about customer value. And I don't need to tell you how important solving customer problems is for PMs. You all know about that. But actually, in the B2B world, I do believe it's a function of people and the egos that they bring to the table, the unique processes that are set up in every organization, and then finally the tech that you offer to fit into this context. And I think it's important for PMs to think about systemic solutions that address the entire landscape and prescribe a path to value that can at least showcase your intention to create value for them, if not realize value in reality. And I say this because value realization in the B2B enterprise world is complicated, right? You need to get exec buy-in, you need resourcing, your organization needs to be ready for it, but your sales teams are working on these things. What's really important is for PMs to think, what's the true path to value for your products? What needs to be true for your product to actually deliver value? And thinking about a value-based framework upfront to prescribe to your customers is how you can start to show them a path to value. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but that's where I'll leave that for now. And so just in summary, I want to say, B2B products are fascinatingly complex, but they are people problems to solve. There are tech challenges, but I think the bigger complex problems are actually people problems. And so I would say, really start to understand your stakeholder incentives, what drives them, how can you work with them to get closer to your customers. And as you go about this, really think about the right sort of messaging that needs to land upfront before the sale happens. And if you do have the pleasure to close those big deals, think hard about adoption, because it's the adoption that can then set you up for the next renewal and the next upsell. And then finally, don't underestimate customer value. It is not just a function of the products that you send out to them. It is a much more multi-variable problem that you should think through. So that's all I had. Well, that's me. And if you have any feedback, I'm being a bit cheeky about this, or being a bit of a PM about this, you can leave some here. But yeah, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.